Good morning in the US and afternoon in the UK, everyone, and welcome. I'm Camille Kamga, the University Transportation Research Center, or UTRC Director. We are delighted to host today webinar, Congestion Pricing in London, Lessons Learned from Across the Pond and Beyond. As the designated University Transportation Center for Federal Region 2 by the US Department of Transportation, UTRC is committed to fostering dialogue and knowledge exchange on critical urban and rural transportation issues. Today, we are focusing on a topic that is both timely and globally relevant: congestion pricing. As many of you know, London has been a pioneer in implementing and evolving congestion pricing scheme since 2003. The experience, including the integration of environmental initiatives like the Ultra Low Emission Zone, offer valuable lessons for cities worldwide. Here in New York City, we are navigating our own complex discussion on congestion pricing, and London experience is frequently cited. This webinar aims to provide a comprehensive look at London journey, examining the program's effectiveness, the challenges that persist, and the opportunities for future improvement. Our goal is to offer insight that can inform policymakers considering similar strategies in cities across the United States and beyond. We are fortunate to have an exceptional panel of speakers with us today. First, we have Matthew Doss, our moderator. Matt is the Transportation Technology Chair at UTRC and brings a wealth of experience in transportation regulation and law, particularly in the New York context. We are also joined by Darius Pieteri, who has spent over 18 years with Transport for London Road User Charging Team. His expertise in delivering policy to improve air quality and transport outcomes will provide invaluable insight into London implementation. And finally, and not the least, we have Steve Wright, a key figure in the UK taxi and private hire industry. Steve has advised multiple London mayors on congestion pricing and transport issues and brings a unique perspective on the program's evolution. We believe that this webinar will offer a rich discussion, shedding light on the complexity and potential of congestion pricing. We encourage you to engage with our speakers and contribute to this important conversation. Thank you for joining us. And without further ado, I will hand it over to Matt Doss to begin the webinar. Matt?
Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Thank you, Camille, for that kind introduction, and to Jerry, Okira, and Kim, and everybody who helped out, including Scott as well, for putting this webinar together and promoting it. I am happy to say I'm already across the pond. I'm a little jet lagged. I am in Vienna and making my way to London on Monday. So I'm going to test everything that I hear today when I get there. But it's great to be joined by not just my colleagues at the university, but also with my friends Darius and Steve, who I've known for quite some time now. First, Darius was actually happy 22-year anniversary for congestion pricing in London. Darius joined TfL, which is one of the members of the IATR, the International Association of Transport Regulators, for many years, over 18 years ago, has been with this program after receiving many promotions at TfL. And he's given presentations before, and we found Darius you to be very straight to the point, excellent, and really know your stuff. And you are the center of the universe, because everybody points to London when it comes to congestion pricing, especially all of us crazy New Yorkers who are only in this for now 2 months with this experiment and dealing with all sorts of politics and insanity right now. But the money is rolling in. It hasn't stopped just yet, even though our new president wants it to stop. I think the count is about 23 million since this whole thing started. And of course, we have my very, very good friend, Steve Wright, who is the chair of the Licensed Private Hire Car Association. So the licensed private hires are the pre-arranged services, not the black cabs in London. And, Steve, like Camille said, has worn many hats. He's a publisher of the Private Hire News. He does consulting. He also owned a business called College Radio Cars. And even more importantly, as an industry stakeholder and industry leader, Steve Wright also served on the TfL board for over 8 years. So, I think between both Darius and Steve, we're going to get the official government insight into things, and we're also going to get how the stakeholders perceive it. And right now, we're going through a tremendous amount of politics right now in New York City over this issue. And we just held a workshop. I'm actually here with the World Road Association in Vienna. And we held with the International Coordinating Council, and I thank you again, Darius, for helping us out with that. A workshop on lessons learned from around the world. On the day that congestion pricing was put into effect, we held a little webinar also on Friday with MIT, talking about with Gridlock Sam Schwartz and DOT what's been going on since it went into effect. But everyone's curious to know what works and what doesn't work in other areas. And I'm hoping we could spend a little bit of time, not just talking about, the history, which I think, Darius, you're going to go first and talk about how we got to where we are now in London, how it evolved over time. I'm sure Steve is going to be able to then share many of his opinions on what worked, what didn't work. And then we'll take some, questions from the audience. And I wouldn't, if a thought strikes anybody, I wouldn't hesitate to throw it into the Q&A. This way we have you queued up as the presentations are going. So welcome, everybody. And thank you for joining us again, Darius and Steve, and doing this with our university. Why don't we start with you, Darius? Let's tell us about the latest, the greatest, and also the history. I mean, 22 years. A lot of people don't know it's been that long. We usually in New York City, we pride ourselves on being ahead of the curve, but maybe we are ahead of the curve or behind it. I'm not really sure. We'll figure that out before the end of this. So
thank
Darius,
you, Matt. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much for the warm introduction. I really hope I can live up to the expectations that you've set. This is a little bit removed from my day job. I don't usually end up speaking on webinars, so I'm incredibly grateful for Matt and the team to have invited me. Clearly, when I presented during the COVID lockdown, I managed to do a reasonable job. I hope that I can continue doing that and give you some information to think about in terms of congestion charging and our experience in London in delivering that. So just bear with me for a second as I get my slide deck started, and we'll go through that. The first thing I would like to say is don't worry too much about there being a large slide deck. I'm not a big fan of large slide decks, and you'll be grateful to know that there are only 5 slides with content on, and I won't be speaking ad nauseum to those. So my name is Darius Spiteri. I'm an Operations and Development Manager in Transport for London, road user charging. I'm part of a team that support the delivery of the congestion charge in London. As Matt has said, I've been with the team for about 18 years, and prior to that I worked in IT and telecoms globally for about a decade. So it was quite an interesting change in career to move from that private sector to the public sector. And part of the experience I gained from that private sector upbringing has been applied to my work, trying to deliver value for Londoners and for Transport for London. So what I'm going to try and do is keep this short and sweet so that we can have as much discussion and conversation as possible. I'm going to try and introduce a bit about myself, where we've gone and how I've developed through the time in working in this space, what things have happened, how the scheme operates at a high level, also some of the outcomes and challenges. Things always don't go smoothly when you deliver these things, which are very complex, and then how things have changed and been refreshed over time as well, and things that are coming down the track a little bit to keep the effectiveness of congestion charging and other linked schemes delivering what the mayor wants from the service we provide. So what I'd like to do is just I'll not talk to the specifics on the slide deck. They're all written quite large, and you can probably read them for yourself. But the scheme itself has been going for about 22 years now. I joined about 3 years after the 2003 launch, when the Western Extension Zone was implemented, which effectively increased the size of the Central London Congestion Charging Zone that had been implemented 3 years previously. This is probably where my first experience of losing, how can I say this? Being impacted by politics. Obviously, with the New York scheme, you're having a lot of politics at the moment, and London's congestion charging was no different when it started. It was incredibly controversial when it was launched, and then it became more controversial as it was expanded. And effectively, the key thing here in terms of politics is you have to have people who have got political skin in the game, who are willing to take a risk on delivering something. In England, when we propose something like this, it's part of a commitment to that the person who's making that political statement to their election and their successful appointment in post. And the three mayors I've worked under, Ken Livingstone, Boris Johnson, and Mayor Sadiq Khan, have all had various moments where this is applied. Most recently for Sadiq Khan, where the Ultra Low Emission Zone was extended London-wide. It's probably most recent, but when I joined in 2007, we had the Western Extension Zone, and Boris Johnson basically campaigned for his election on the removal of that. So it really does come in a lot, and you have to have people with incredible political willpower to deliver this kind of scheme. And I think you're probably seeing that at the moment. A few things as I reflect on the time where I've been at the organisation. I show charges starting at £5 per day, but now getting to £15, and that's partly down to keeping the cost relevant to people. As inflation and costs have changed, you want to make the journey time and cost of the journey that you're making relevant to people so that it isn't inconsequential. But at the same time, you kind of want people to be mindful about their journeys. The way you get people off the road and changing into different modes of transport is to make it something that they're consciously doing. So we're not talking about people being zen here, so to speak, but we are really talking about people thinking about their journey, and do they need to make it by car? Is there a better way to do it? And part of that is the elasticity of demand for making that journey by car versus the cost that it's going to have to you in the pocket at the end of the day. I think the other thing I would probably say, as that developed during my time, we started in 2003, and the world's a very different place. There was not Uber, there wasn't a lot of web technology apps. Those kind of things weren't prevalent, and we wanted to make sure people could pay the charge where it was convenient to them. So we had things like retail offering, where people would go into a newsagent shop and pay for the charge. You could do that over the counter. We had in some parking bays and car parks, machines where you could pay the charge. Now, one of the things that TfL are responsible for is making sure that the value for money is achieved in delivering the scheme. And these things are quite costly to deliver. So after some time, we basically stopped delivering those services because we found it easier for people to pay the charge via telephone line, on automated services, websites, and eventually in support of road users being compliant with the scheme, we recognized that sometimes people would forget to pay the charge, and actually we want people to be compliant with our scheme. So reasonably early on, we set up what we call auto pay accounts, which allowed people to pay for a journey just having driven in the zone, being detected and paid on a monthly basis on a statement, so they could see what they'd done, travelled in, and didn't risk getting enforced against. So one of the things which is key really and is legislated, that the aim of the scheme is to basically deliver revenue for the Transport for London organisation, the Mayor, to deliver the Mayor's transport strategy. Ultimately, the aim as set out in the Mayor's Transport Strategy from 2018, prior to his first election, is to ultimately by 2041 deliver an environment where 80% of all trips in London are carried out by public transport, foot or cycling, to basically change the mode of transport. And that's on the TfL website. If you follow the link when this slide deck is shared later on, you'll find Mayor's Transport Strategy states that on the first page of the website. And that's what we're really aiming for. And being clear about what you're trying to achieve is important, to take people along with you on that journey. Isn't always successful, but you have to try your best to make it as clear as possible. So for those of you who are less familiar with the London congestion charging zone, it's set out in central London, and the map that you're seeing in front of you basically will show you its extent. It's a boundary scheme. The red dotted line shows where the scheme operates, and it operates just before, Monday to Friday during the core working day, and then in the evening on Saturdays and Sundays and bank holidays. As Matt was asking me, note you don't charge between Christmas Day and New Year. We don't want to charge Santa Claus for coming into London in central London. So we do allow him a bit of grace there, and anyone else who wants to come into London and enjoy its many iconic sites, they're able to do so without having to pay a charge. The daily charge I mentioned earlier on, it went up from £5 when it started to £15. That £15 increase to £15 most recently happened after COVID, where we were given support from the national government, and they insisted as part of that we had to increase the charge that we had on road users, basically. So that was the most recent charge increase that we've had, and it basically was a consequence of the response to COVID and national government agreeing a funding settlement with TfL to allow us to continue delivering the services we needed to do in London, and also help us in a situation where, because of COVID, public transport numbers, which is our major source of revenue, decreased to the point that it was difficult to operate. One of the things you'll notice at the bottom, we have a concept of a penalty charge. Like I said at the beginning of the presentation, what we want to try and do is make sure people are compliant with the scheme, so they pay the charge, or if they're entitled to an exemption or a discount, they have access to it and therefore are compliant with the scheme. One of the things that we have in the UK is a decriminalised set of powers that allow us, if a payment or compliance with the scheme isn't achieved, then we are able to issue what we know as a penalty charge notice, which starts off at £180. There's a £90 discount if it's paid within 14 days. And that basically allows us to go after people who avoid payment of the scheme or take measures to try and avoid it. What I want to do next is just talk about some outcomes and challenges that we faced. I don't want to go in a huge amount of detail, but to give you a flavour of a few things that we have come across in our time, and some things which may be around the corner for yourselves. So this is just a bit of a graphic showing the trips per day in millions by different modes of transport. And you can see clearly around 2020, the dip that happened as a consequence of COVID. COVID locked down transport, public transport in particular, and even regionally people weren't traveling as much. You can see the drop in traffic levels and trips of all kinds, basically. And things are recovering now to a point where they were similar to before COVID in 2019. But what you should be able to see, and we hope to continue developing, is the red, the private transport. These are vehicles which are privately owned and are used making journeys. We want to decrease those, and the blue, dark green and light green for cycling, walking and public transport are areas where we want to try and get that to 80%. As the scheme developed over time, it's fair to say volumes of cars did decrease initially and then recovered, and there is a variety of reasons for that. And I think one of the things that people will speak to and notice eventually over time is that people become a bit more insensitive to price of the journey, and then they start to decide actually it's more convenient for me to do it. So you have to have a set of measures that are going to promote the modes of transport that you want. So after COVID, there was a concern that the recovery might be car-led, where people drive in private transport. And to be fair, after COVID, that's a fair response. People didn't want to get on public transport because you might get the illness, the virus, and become unwell. And also, national government was advising people not to do that for a while. But really, we wanted to try and make sure that we didn't have a car-led recovery. Part of the approach to doing that was to increase provision for walking, increase bus lanes and their hours of operation, and increase complementary measures like cycle superhighways, which are segregated. So one of the things that people will remark is that there is the feeling that road use and journey times haven't improved a huge amount. I think the context when we look at this chart is this chart is showing the change that's been happening because of the investment in public transport and alternative means of getting about in London through revenue generated from the congestion charge in support of the Mayor's transport strategy. But also it's taken in the context of London having a growing population. I think the last thing I'll probably speak to on this particular graphic is we effectively do reduce the number of area of road that's available for road users, which are cars, and that gives the impression that congestion is getting worse again. And that's because we're wanting to have more space available for buses, for people who are walking, for people who are cycling, and cycling numbers have gone up dramatically in London. You just need to go outside some of the buildings I work in or other parts of London, and Matt, this is for you. When you're crossing the road, do look left and right, not because you'll get hit via a car or any other vehicle, more likely you get knocked over by a cyclist if you're not careful, because there are so many about. So where it does say look left and look right at the pedestrian crossing, do check. That was the health and safety moment. I'll get on to the next piece I wanted to do, and this is where things get a bit murky really, and this is an example of things that happen as a consequence of having a charging scheme. We must remember really what we're doing is charging people for things they used to do for free, and this is an example. I'm using Ghost Plate as a tipping point, as an example of where people take measures, and in this case what they do is apply a film to license plates, vehicle registration numbers, which reflect infrared light, which is commonly used on ANPR cameras, so that they can't be read either in whole or in part. And this is a criminal offence, but they use it. It has an impact on our ability to charge people and pursue them, but also it has impacts on other parts of road traffic enforcement, such as speeding and issues like that, where they want to avoid it. And it's increasingly prevalent. We do work closely with camera manufacturers, as you might imagine, to have countermeasures that will overcome this. And there is hopefully some good news on that coming down the track. But really, I didn't want to dwell on the technology behind the plates there, but really use this as a segue into discussing things that can happen as an unintended consequence of operating schemes. And this is basically where you get people who are behaving in a criminal manner to exploit the system, either because they wish to have a discount of some kind, or they wish to benefit from other people's lack of understanding of the schemes. So we have encountered things where people develop or apply fraudulent behavior in counterfeiting documents to entitle them to discounts of various types. As you can imagine, we have rigorous processes in place to capture that and counter it, but we also have situations where effectively people act as an intermediary. They take and exploit people's confusion with the scheme, and things like Google ads are used to promote sites where they take people's data and charge them for the privilege, and may or may not pay the charge for them. But basically, they abuse a position of trust by either mimicking or trying to act as an intermediary and charge for a service which they don't need to do. That's some of the challenges we faced, and I'm sure at some point down the line in New York you might come across these as well. I think the last bit here, which is this lovely picture of a Piaggio. I'm not going to advertise the company, but it basically is relating to what we call as a three-wheel discount. This was known jokingly within the team as the Sterling Moss discount. Sterling Moss is a Formula One racing champion from the United Kingdom from years gone by. He drove a three-wheeled motor trike in his later years and basically campaigned for the inclusion of a discount for these vehicles. And TfL and the mayor at the time acquiesced to that. I think the headlines in the local newspapers weren't really flattering, and we wanted to get rid of that as a story. So we did that. And then for many, many years, it was very, very quiet until Piaggio brought out this lovely, stylish motor trike with two wheels at the front and one at the back, which complied with the discount. And now every single year, when they bring out a new model, they're constantly in contact with our organization to say, is our new model compliant with the discount? Will our users get a discount? So all I'm just saying is being really, really careful about how you apply discounts. They have unintended consequences. I think at the start it was quite amusing for us, but actually the reality now is there's people on a regular basis dealing with the European representative of Piaggio who wants to make sure his vehicles get a discount. So last bit, I promise, and then I'll wrap up, and thank you for your time. We're just doing some changes and developments to keep things fresh. I think one of the key things here, it's not just about road user charging and charging people for driving in the zone. We have a direct vision standard scheme, which is safety permit, which basically will help Matt as well when he's crossing the road. It protects people who are vulnerable road users like cyclists and Matt and other visitors to London from getting knocked over and flattened by heavy goods vehicles. Basically, we want to have the highest standards for vehicles that drive in London to make sure pedestrians and cyclists are safe. Ultra Low Emission Zone, this is probably the one which is a bit more controversial. And to be clear, it's not a charging scheme. It's about reducing particulate matter emissions in London, in particular around locations where you have oftentimes the poorest and most vulnerable citizens in the city living next to main arterial roads, and they suffer incredibly poor health outcomes as a consequence of the emissions of PM2 particulate matters. And we want to reduce that. And the Ultra Low Emission Zone has been the vehicle for doing that. And that complements the congestion charge and is now London-wide to the boundary of the M25. Enhanced cycleways. We have segregated cycleways, lots of them in London now, and they continue to increase. This makes cycling safer. And the final thing is tunnel user charging. And the new Silvertown tunnel and the charging scheme for Blackwall and Silvertown opens in April the 7th this year. So not very far away, and that might take away some of the heat from New York City, where people start to complain about us again rather than the MTA and them trying to take money from honest New Yorkers. We'll probably get the headlines for a little while and you'll get a breather, hopefully. I think that's where I want to leave it. I just wanted to thank everyone for their attention. And any questions at all, I'm happy to take them towards the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Darius. That was very helpful. And the questions are pouring in. Now let's go to you, Steve. Let's talk a little bit about your perspective and how you were involved with these policies and the shifting policies. Good to see, Darius, that there's some capitalism going on over in the UK. People have business models that are benefiting from the exemptions, like the motorcycles and the trikes. Good to see capitalism is alive across the pond. So, Steve, tell us a little bit about your group as well, so everybody on this side of the pond knows what the trade group's all about. And in my world as being taxi commissioner, I know how divided things could be between the different for-hire segments, and I'm sure that played into this too with the black cabs and the private hire rivalry, and all this went into place before Uber was even invented, remember? So love to get your perspective on things, Steve. Welcome.
Matt, well, thanks very much for giving me the opportunity to speak today and to tell another side to the story. I think it's always good to be balanced, and I think you've got both sides of the story here present today. I'll run in a few quick slides just to say about the LPHCA. We're a trade body that represents taxi and private hire vehicle operators. They are businesses that take bookings for taxi and PHV drivers. We work with regulators and the regulated to secure regulations that work for the industry as well as the travelling public. We've been involved with congestion charging, as it's known in London, since well before it happened in 2003. In fact, I talked to Ken Livingstone as soon as he became mayor about the congestion charge in 2000. And I talked with Mark Watts, his transport advisors that wrote the first mayor's strategy way back then. About myself, I've been in London all my life, multimodal user. I've used every single form of transport you could think of. I'm a campaigner. I did 500,000 miles as a driver, building up my private hire vehicle firm as an operator. I've been a regulator and was appointed by the second mayor, Boris Johnson, for 2 periods of 4 years as a TfL board member, as the industry representative, during which time there was the removal of some congestion charge, which I'll talk about later. I regularly work closely with politicians, regulators, members and safety groups, sometimes, as Matt said, on a consultative basis. My expertise is trying to get politicians to listen and then act. And a very wise person once told me all decisions are political. I think you'll be able to relate to that. And I found if you convince the politicians that you will prevail. So I'm not going to read from the slides all the time. I've got some notes and bullet points. Congestion pricing in London, the true facts. So there's a lot of misinformation about the success of the London congestion charge. Statistics produced by Transport for London are a bit selective and, in my view, somewhat misleading. And I think your own Mark Twain has something to say about statistics, a famous quote. If you ask Londoners, and I did a straw poll this morning amongst 20 people I was with, if congestion has got better in the last 20 years, then there was 100% no, it's far worse. So, I think there's 2 sides to every story. You've also got to realise that London is consistently regarded as the most congested city in Europe. It's the 5th most congested city globally, and it has the most congested road in London, the A40, which was 3 miles from my office, which I've sat crawling along many, many times. So on the webinar that I was on last week that I dropped into because I wanted to get some background on how things were, I was quite staggered to hear how well London congestion charge scheme has worked. I was really staggered. Oh, it's done this, it's done that, it's done the other. Well, to be honest with you, it hasn't. And I'm going to tell the truth because that's what I do. So, do I believe in congestion management? And so that should have said yes, absolutely. I do believe in congestion management completely. So, what hasn't worked in London? I'll come to some of the things that what have worked and what could be improved a bit later. But exemptions, for example, are all over the place. I met with Ken Livingstone and the first transport member of the GLA, the transport chair of the GLA, John Biggs, before they even had City Hall, and to say why taxis and private hire vehicles should be exempt. Well, now you've got a situation where taxis are exempt, but private hire vehicles were and are now not exempt because the third mayor of London has unexempted them. Another bad thing is the all or nothing tariff. It's £15 or pay a bit more if you don't pay on time, which is roughly $20 plus. So a taxi journey or a local minicab journey, as we're called, from say Kilburn into central London that cost you £5 would now cost you £20, a 400% increase. And of course, people that book private hire vehicles as a form of transport are often the elderly, the less mobile people, the disabled and what have you. So this has been a tax on them. I mentioned earlier that part of the zone was successfully removed by Boris Johnson when he was mayor. Well, I was actually on the TfL board when it was removed. And I had discussions with him because I was on the audit committee. I was very much involved in that because it simply wasn't working. It was damaging that particular part of London, and it wasn't working in the North Kensington area that it was in. And it really become a tax, you know, in every sense of the word. Now, another key thing from, you know, I speak for the industry and other modes on this, very little of the money has reached the taxi and private hire sectors. You know, it's an opportunity to do some real blue sky thinking, but all the money seemed to pour into buses and other modes of transport, which are heavily subsidized. Now, I was in New York only for the first time last fall, and I was very interested to see the number of empty buses that were causing congestion in New York. And it's the same in London. Many buses are empty or not anywhere near capacity. The other problem that you have, and again, it was mentioned on the webinar last week, was that payment evasion is rife on subsidized buses and train network. There are massive problems with this. And the argument is, well, we can't afford to police it. Well, there's an absolute, I learned this on the TfL board. There's an absolute massive loss in revenue on buses and the train network. And it's actually a fact that 52% of people, not including the evaders, are not actually paying for the bus. 52% is a freebie. So, you know, there's one other thing that, you know, before I go on to the next slide, the final problem that everybody has, and you'll be able to relate to this, is, of course, politics. And you can see different mayors doing different things, and you've got a newly elected mayor arguing with New York about what should happen and what have you. Politics is a big problem, and it really does get in the way of trying to reduce pollution, improve traffic and what have you. So, you know, that's a key point that I've sort of noticed. So what can other cities learn, you know, New York and other cities? In my recent trip to New York, and after joining the Mobility Forum last week, it flagged up some interesting points for me. And I'm always, you know, even though I'm getting on in years, very keen to learn. It seems to me that the Manhattan scheme seems to work very well. But you know, I believe it could work even better. That's my sort of view. It's wrong to believe, you know, also, and I was quite staggered at the amount people said, oh, the Great London scheme has reduced traffic, it's done this, it's done that. Well, if you look at selective figures, you could get that impression. But I've got to tell you, if you did a straw poll of Londoners, over 90% would say it's absolutely terrible. And it isn't, you know, it's wrong to say the London model is a shining example of everything that's good. Now, the other thing that sort of came up and cropped up and is that taxis and other door-to-door modes, and you've got to bear in mind who uses door-to-door transport. People use it for safety, they use it for security, they use it for mobility, they use it for disabled reasons, they use it because they're elderly, because they can't get on a bike. And by the way, your best chance of being hit by anything in London is a cyclist, because they go straight through red lights, they speed, and they're not insured. I've nearly had 3 comings together with cyclists, so I can speak from experience. Taxis and other door-to-door modes should get funding from congestion pricing. You know, this would lead to better buy-in from drivers for sure. And I think, you know, that's a topic that could be looked at. Revenue could also help drivers transition to cleaner vehicles. And my view on the transition to electric is it needs to be done via hybrid. So there is no range anxiety. There's no need to put absolute infrastructure in place that costs a small fortune. It's difficult to put at roadside. And I don't think we should forget hydrogen. I do think that should be looked at in the mix as a stepping stone towards lower emissions. The other thing I'm quite feisty about is I don't think revenue should go to the big ride-hailing sector, but it should help drivers directly when possible. That's my view. It shouldn't go to big corporations that have got shareholders that are satisfied. It should go back to the industry. And I think this will give you far better buy-in from drivers. I'm not in favour of subsidising fares, as my view is business, and you should run any transport business to stay above the line and not be dependent on subsidies or handouts. So that's another thing. And just one other thing to sort of cover off is you cannot run a viable taxi or other transit service on the basis of doing the last mile home. I keep hearing about the last mile home. Well, I got to tell you, my business wouldn't have lasted 10 minutes if I only put my vehicles on the road for the last mile home. If you invest in a taxi or a private hire vehicle or a bus or a train or a tram, you're not there just to make a bit of money at the graveyard hours of the day to get people home on the last bit of the journey. You know, you have to look at, you know, I did sort of 2 million journeys with my company. So I know a little about the logistics of this and the type of journey and why people use it. So really, 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 this last mile home myth, I think it's a political soundbite. Oh, we got this for the last mile home. Let me tell you, you can't run a taxi or a private hire or a bus business just doing the last mile home. So I wanted to make that point today. So finally, what other congestion management mitigations could New York and other cities consider? And a lot have been critical of the congestion charge. I'm very, very keen to assist congestion management rather than criticize it. So a great start will be to change the name. Why call it congestion charge? Congestion management scheme is far, far better. I think changing the name, if you look at it as a charge, it then gets cynically viewed rightly or wrongly as a tax. I do think you could consider changing the name of what you're doing. You must have consideration to assess the impact of the measures on the neighbouring authorities, because moving the traffic from one place to another, I said this the other day, it's like rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. You know, one person's gain is another person's pain. You don't want to be doing that. You really do need to look at the regulatory impact of what you do. If you block one road off, are you going to put it down somebody else's? So that's something that I really believe in. You do need to also have some incentives to do deliveries outside of peak periods. That really should be considered. Now, I got to tell you, I was very involved with the Olympic Delivery Authority on the TfL board and as a trade body as a major logistical provider during the 2012 Olympics and Paralympics, you know, the London Olympic Games. Mm-hmm. We really did some work on moving lorries and deliveries and big vehicles right out of the whole of London to get them logistically traveling at times when they could do deliveries, not get in the way of people going to work. And it really did work. There was, you know, the London Olympics was absolutely clear of traffic, and it was really, really good. The other thing, you know, where it's possible, I appreciate, you know, on my recent visit to New York that this isn't very possible. But you've got to consider parking, because I think up to, you know, the statistics say up to a third of vehicles are looking for a parking space. They're driving around looking for parking. You know, if you can do it, you need to provide parking, charge for it, but provide it. So that's one other thing. And the last thing is better road space management. As I say, the cycle superhighways, I was on the TfL board when they were being delivered, as Boris was a biker and famous for riding his bike all over the place. I've got to tell you that some of these cycle lanes, you can't drop disabled people without them nearly getting hit. You can get mowed down on a zebra crossing where, you know, the priority is meant to be to the passenger. And you know, putting in loads of bus lanes that one bus every 10 minutes goes down. I know 2 cycle lanes that have been in the London Borough of Harrow, which is where my office was, that in 20 years I haven't seen a bicycle in. 20 years, and they've got the road space allocated to bicycles. There's one in Harrow, there's one in Rayners Lane. I've never seen a cycle in it. I've seen cyclists on the pavement. I've seen cyclists in the main highway. I've never actually seen them in the cycle space. So the last but not least thing is to say that London has all manner of confusing restrictions and privileges, as I've alluded to earlier. They are a bit confusing, and I think when I looked at some of the things you've done, the charge structure and various other things, I think that you could learn from some of those lessons. London also has a fantastic control system for its traffic lights called the Scoot system, which controls, I think, 5,000 or 6,000 traffic lights that talk to each other. And on the board, I was actually shown a demo where you can tweak this system, make a 2-second alteration to the traffic light, and it can improve traffic. Or conversely, if you make the wrong selection, it can cause a traffic jam within hours. And last but not least, just a New York takeaway from my visit. I was astonished that you don't have what we call box junction entry management. Now, there's a few New Yorkers on this call, so I begged to them because I was only there for 3 days. But I couldn't cross the road at times because a massive great vehicle had gone through the junction, blocking the junction and blocking my route across the road. Even though the countdown was on, I couldn't. If I wanted to get killed, there was a good chance of taking a chance. But we've got box junction management, and whilst I'm not a big advocate of fine, if you go into a junction, there are cameras that give you £100 ticket, $150 ticket for doing so. I've got to say that is something I feel, if you haven't got it, I didn't see it in New York, would really work. And, you'll get some revenue for it for those that abuse it. You'll really improve the traffic flow, particularly as the structure of New York is a grid. As the guy that coined the gridlock phase said, it is a grid. So box junction management, I think, could really help you. So I've tried to be critical. I've tried to be fair. And there's my views. So thanks for listening, and I'll be delighted to take any questions.
No, thank you, Steve. And, the switchboard has been lighting up with questions. I've been following them. I'm going to try to group them together. But I always thought, there was no traffic in London during the Olympics because the black cab and private hire drivers didn't want to deal with the traffic. So they all went on vacation to Spain during the summer. I don't know if that's true or if this is a legend. But I have to just read this one question from Vera Crowell. You don't have to answer it, but to your point, Steve, have any of you had to take a child to daycare, get to work on time, pick up the child before the deadline, and get home on the bus or on a bike with the child? The point being made that, I think, TfL, Darius, is, and a lot of other different transport regulators and public officials, I think they need to look at the world a little bit differently, that cars are not going anywhere. They could be cleaner. They could be part of the solution. I think what's been happening, not just in the US and academic institutions and policymaking, is that, scooters and bikes have become a religion. And God help you if you should raise the concept of a car or a taxi. I mean, it's become such a modal bias that, it kind of takes the reasoning out of everything. And we have several questions here, and I want to thank the New York City Bar Association for joining us. We have a lot of transportation lawyers on the call. We got, Lou Venich and some others that have been asking some questions about, package delivery and the cost of delivery of goods. So maybe, I don't know if this is something that both of you or either of you analyzed, but, just jumping into some of the questions here. We do have the New York Trucking Association and Zach Miller here. I see him on the call. How, from the beginning of the program till now, how has there been any analysis of impact on the cost of goods delivery or charges being built into, deliveries, especially during the pandemic? Is that something that's been analyzed in terms of the cost of goods being passed on to consumers? Is that something that has had a dramatic impact?
Shall I step in for a moment there?
Sure.
I'll give it my best shot. To be honest, the space in terms of freight and delivery, I don't have data to hand on that. It's not an area of my expertise. But what I can speak to, I guess, is I've worked with a variety of stakeholders. So Steve represents a stakeholder organization. I've worked in my time with a brewery and logistics group. I'm a big fan of pubs and getting beer on time to pubs and making sure it's delivered. They have particular challenges because of the weight of the kegs of barrels that they're unloading. And we work with those organizations to make sure they can do so safely. absorb the cost of the congestion charge for their vehicles where they're not exempted because of the nature of the vehicle into their operating costs. And when they're looking at this, if they're making a delivery on that level, it's kind of amortized into their business model. So if you are charged for £15 for one day and that vehicle is making 15 deliveries during the course of a day, which it might do in central London, that's £1 per delivery effectively. So it tends to be absorbed. Other parts of similar exceptional types of delivery service, cash in transit, trade bodies, I've dealt with them, and they manage the cost, so they minimize it to their members and their participants by planning their journeys into central London, so they're more effective. They will use vehicles that are compliant and entitled to discounts, so they're able to do that to diminish the cost to them as far as they possibly can. I mean, that's the experience I have as someone who deals with the congestion charge, and also, as I say, the sign behind me on the other side is a loading bay. And part of the complementary kind of approach that TfL has to take, has been responsible for the roads, is to allow loading where it's safe and sensible to do so. And you'll notice this timing on the sign, it says except 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. Basically, that's outside of peak flow. So vehicles can stop there and unload during the times where we don't have peak flow. So we encourage that behaviour by providing the provision so that they can do so in a manner which is safe and sensible and has the minimum disruption to peak flow traffic in London. Unfortunately, I'm not able to give any specific data, but increasingly you are getting micro deliveries and private vehicles which are making deliveries as well. With the advent of people doing online shopping and home delivery, increasingly that is a thing that needs to be looked at, evaluated and considered as well. But we try and work closely with major stakeholders to make sure their interaction with the congestion charge and other schemes is managed as appropriately as possible.
Yeah, and Darius, there's a lot of, I'm sure there's been changes to traffic patterns. We have a lot of questions about that. But also there's probably hard to pinpoint, with the pandemic, what the cause is for a lot of those changes. But one thing I wanted to go back to for, Steve may be, able to answer this question too, that's come up here. One of the first questions we got from Marty Isaac is, like what was going on when it passed in the first place? My recollection is that there was, when before Brexit, there was a lot of pressure on the mayor and TfL to reduce emissions, because of EU standards. But Marty had pointed out that he was happy to hear that it wasn't a money-making or a tax instrument by design, or maybe it was perceived that way. So I'm wondering, Steve, like when this all went down, like, I think the New York story, whatever we call it, we should have called it the clean air zone or something else. Everybody kind of feels now it was the wrong terminology, and maybe we should have been not putting a price tag on it. Maybe we should have been, taking a look at what you guys are doing now, Darius, which is, the ultra low emission zones, which actually seems to be working. You get emissions down 20%. To what extent was the narrative politically being built at the time? Like what was going on in 2003? At the time, was it like this is another tax, another charge, or was it being billed as you're going to breathe better? There's going to be less traffic, or how did you manage those expectations? Because if you look around the world, in addition to the stats that you provided, Darius, 10%, maybe 15% at the best point in time. It wasn't like a game changer. It was just like basically brought traffic down a little bit, but didn't it wasn't completely noticeable where you have empty streets, right? So I'm wondering, maybe Steve, you could give some context about, what was kind of the landscape when this went down, and how did the political views evolve over time, if they did? Is it still considered like a dirty word? Lisa Daglian is asking. From the MTA Passenger Advisory Board, who you met, whether public opinion has it changed? I mean, or is it basically the same over the last 20 years?
Well, the point is, Matt, that it's always advertised as the thing that's going to reduce congestion and actually clean up the air, but it doesn't. That doesn't happen. And and they keep changing the rules. I mean, taxis are exempt, but private hire vehicles aren't. I actually like the scheme where there's a low rate for taxis and private hire vehicles. I think that will be far better than all or nothing. What Darius said just now, if you're doing 15 deliveries, that's not the way taxis work. You may just be taking a disabled child on one journey into London, maybe taking somebody to one hospital in London. You know, it doesn't work that you've got a set of deliveries in every logistics. So it started off as, yeah, you know, it's going to clean the air up, it's for everybody's good. But the reality is that with other recently added in low traffic zones and ULEZ zones, the traffic has got cripplingly worse. For some people, where they've blocked the road off, it's like a park outside their front door. For the other people that have to suffer the traffic that's been moved, it's awful. And the feeling is you're paying for this like a tax now. It's regarded as a tax by everybody. Just coming back to the corporate side of it, which I can speak on stakeholders, they simply have to pass these costs on to the consumers. It doesn't stop traffic. If you've got to be doing a delivery in London, you've got to be doing a delivery in London. If you're taking a child to school, you've got to take the child to school if they've got disabilities or special needs. It isn't a mitigator of traffic. And if you then restrict the road space and plant cycle highways, all right, yeah, the 100,000 cycles would be great, but the 2.5 million other motorists in London are getting into more gridlock. So, it really is time that London reviewed the whole of the thing, particularly with its recent measures, because we've got members that operates in parts of London that says the traffic is 300% worse than it was pre-pandemic. 300% worse moving around. That's a problem.
Well, maybe Darius, you could respond to to Steve's comments, and in particular on the ULEZ experiment. I mean, it's been going on for since like 2019, right before the pandemic. I mean, I think there are, and this goes to Ellen Partridge, who used to work for the Fed. She has a question about whether it's affected car ownership. I think from your chart, if you look around the time that you implemented that, it looks like, I don't know about car ownership going down, but private vehicles certainly went down a little bit coming into the zone. Is that a good policy? Like Madrid doesn't do both like you guys do, but they just do the ULEZ zone. And is that maybe the answer? Maybe we should focus more on the environment first, and then worry about traffic later. Let's get the clean vehicles into the zone and encourage people.
It's an interesting conversation to be had, and I think we were looking at congestion pricing, and I tried to focus my delivery on congestion pricing and charging. ULEZ is a different beast. It's not intended to be revenue generating. It's not to produce revenue that is designed to enhance transport. It's to reduce vehicles that come into London which are non-compliant with the emission standards that they have to meet. The aim of that is to reduce the negative health outcomes. One of the things which has been in British media, I don't know if it's traveled over to New York at all, America, is I think probably in the lifetime of the scheme being widened, or in the immediate lead up to it, I think one of the first people in the UK was diagnosed as having on their death certificate as being affected by emissions from vehicular traffic. There's an unfortunate young child who died as a consequence of a lung condition, which was exacerbated by vehicular pollution. That kind of thing hits the point where the ULEZ is trying to reduce harms from particulate matter. I think in terms to try and answer your question about the volumes of traffic, the ownership of vehicles, TfL, as part of its approach to mitigating the risk, in particular for low-income families, implemented a scrappage scheme, which was implemented twice. The most recent one in the 2019 expansion, to enable people to scrap a vehicle and replace it with a cleaner vehicle. Just for context here, a cleaner vehicle. My second car was a Ford Focus, a petrol engine Ford Focus. It would be now probably 15 years old that's compliant with a ULEZ scheme. We're not talking about super expensive, high performance new vehicles that people have to get to be compliant with the ULEZ, but it reduces diesel emissions and helps with people's health outcomes. And oftentimes, I think the thing here is the poor person who can't afford to go in the taxi, who's waiting with the pram at the bus station or the bus stop with their child in a pram at exhaust pipe, tailpipe level. They don't have a choice in breathing that emission that's coming out of that vehicle. You know, and what we're doing is trying to reduce the impacts by reducing pollution, and that's what the ULEZ is about. I hope that answers your question. I don't like giving kind of politic answers, or I sometimes feel like I've got a bit of a United Nations helmet on here when I'm speaking, but you know, I think there is a place for it. I think it complements. I don't think it replaces the congestion charge. The congestion charge is in central London. The ultra low emission zone, after its third phase, so it was expanded twice, is now Greater London, the whole of London, a much larger scale scheme.
Well, I mean, one point that Zach from the Trucking Association just pointed out is, I don't know if this was under consideration at any point in time in London, but that, you know, we have a per trip charge, you know, as opposed to just coming in
daily
to the zone for one day. So that's definitely hurt a lot of consumers here, because the trucks are passing on all of the costs to the passengers. And honestly, you guys are not making as much money as us. I mean,
no,
you know, the taxis and the for hires, or our private hires, have been paying this fee for years, and they've raised $2 billion there, 20 million in the last 2 months, and you guys only brought in 2.6 billion in 20 years. It's kind of
I did see the numbers for the first month of operation. I thought, oh, that's a bit of a step change. I mean, the closest we're going to get to with that at the moment probably is tunnel user charging, where the new Silvertown tunnel is opening, and we'll be charging for tunnel travel, and that will be on a trip basis rather than a one charge for the whole day, which we do with the congestion charge. So that's probably the closest that we've got to that at the moment, and it also has aspects of peak and non-peak, which is closer to the model that you have in New York with the congestion pricing zone. But it's an interest. I think there's lots of thoughts that have been shared, which have been really interesting to me. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to have listened in on that as well. So thank you. Good question.
Thanks, Steve. You know, in terms of the private hires and the black cabs, you know, what is the mood about ULEV? Are most of the vehicles, I know there's issues with plug-in electric vehicles, even though there are a lot on the streets right now and the infrastructure, but do most of the industry's vehicles meet the standard for taking advantage of being exempt from the ULEV charges?
Yes, most of them do. The problem is the race towards cleaner air. The infrastructure hasn't caught up. I mean, we had Heathrow closed the other week, or this week, because an electricity substation went out. No one in that area had a great deal of joy driving to work in their electric vehicle and what have you. We've got infrastructure problems, and we've got, you know, I think 30,000 chargers in London, 2.7 million motorists. I mean, and there's a road space and all the network and all the stuff that goes into the ground. So all of these things, we've got disabled vehicles that were licensed under a Euro 6 fairly clean diesel, that now, because of battery, the body weight ratio puts them out for being exempt from the thing. You can't actually get the right vehicle balance with the regulations. So you've got less disabled vehicles being utilised in London. And the London Assembly said, well, what are we going to do about this? Well, you're making the ULEZ and LEZ rules so hard that the guys can't use these anymore. They can't buy them. They can't afford them. And it's very difficult, you know, on the disabled side to actually build a vehicle that's wheelchair accessible, fit for purpose as a real mobility vehicle, and whack in massive, great big batteries. They just don't design them, and the converters have given up trying to convert them. And then you've got the problem that 90% of taxi drivers don't actually have the ability to charge from home. All of these things come into the mix, and it's something that New York should be considering when it it moves into its air quality, because we all want better air quality, but it's the transition to that move, and it's the transition with the congestion charge is very important. I think you've got some good things going for you. I think there's things that London can learn. I think there's things you can learn. That's why I've come on this, to give an alternative view today. But in answer to your question, there shouldn't be a cliff edge. We're going to nut zero. I called it nut zero. It's emissions impossible. Somebody once called it. You need to be realistic and have good benchmarks that are achievable, rather than say everybody needs to do this. You need to chuck your old vehicle away and do this and do that. There needs to be transition. The transition needs to help business, and it needs to help taxes, and it needs to help the citizens that need to be moved around. It's too cliff edge presently. I think that's everywhere.
And there is a long list of exemptions, by the way. I mean, if you look on the website, I mean, even certain residents of certain areas get these exemptions. But I think we're wondering, we had a fight for the bus exemption in New York City, hard, and MTA didn't want to do it initially because they had to reach $1 billion per year figure by state law. So it was hard to, but they eventually got it. But you have minibuses and community bus, like nonprofit exemptions. Did you see a rise in the use of microtransit or private buses as a result?
So it's an interesting question. I think from the very start, the congestion charge has got an exemption for, it's called buses. 9+ seater discount is what we call it. It's 100%. And basically
nonprofits and charities too, though, right?
Yeah. So there's kind of a bit of a nuance there. So when we talk about the 9+ seater discount, it doesn't really matter who the driver of that 9+ seater vehicle is. And, it did lead to some interesting things where we saw Land Rovers with 2 benches on either side of the rear cabin being put in to try and claim it could seat more than 9 people. But joking aside, really what we're talking about here, when you have a charity minibus being operated, we had a sunset period for the ULEZ because we recognized that with those charity vehicles, minibuses, they're expensive to replace. It will take them time to replace those vehicles. So we wanted to afford them with extra time to become compliant with the ULEZ. They were already exempted from the congestion charge because of their tax class as a 9+ seater vehicle. They were discounted, so they didn't need to do anything extra apart from to apply to us for a discount to have it and not pay the congestion charge. We also offered during the COVID pandemic support for charities. So there was food bank drops and people weren't able to go out of their homes. So we afforded an extension of a reimbursement scheme available to NHS to the charity sector. So where these people were going and visiting people's homes, they could charge back their journey to TfL. And I think one of the lessons that I've learned is basically to afford some flexibility. And the challenge we have when I operate the scheme as part of the team that deliver it is we're bound by what the scheme allows us to do and permits us to do, and also the systems and the technology that we apply and use through our service provider. And any change which substantially changes that, we have to pay for, which then diminishes the revenue that we're able to deliver. So we have to balance these questions and requests for change. And I'll shut up there.
Matt.
Sure.
Just to say that, yes, I think the over 9-seater regime and is well covered under PSV, bus, PCV, whatever you want to call it, for exemptions. But the smaller 8-seaters that get licensed as private hire vehicles are now paying the charge. And it's an absolute nonsense. If you make the statement, well, we want to get people out of cars, a private hire vehicle can do 20 journeys in a day in the city in one vehicle, as opposed to 20 vehicles coming in. And I'm absolutely nonplussed as to why they took away the congestion charge zone that Ken Livingstone gave us in 2000. Because
was that lobbying by your friend Steve McNamara? for
No,
that?
not
Or
really.
no?
No, I know Steve well, and he wasn't lobbying for us to get
Okay.
congestion
So
charge.
how did that happen? I mean, they just looking for more money, or they? I
Well,
mean,
this is where money comes in and politics comes in. Oh, yeah, we can make some money here, blah, 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 blah. I'm apolitical, so I'm not going to criticise any of the mayors. I've worked with them all. But it's clearly a revenue reason. There's not an ounce of logic in, they were saying, oh, there's a lot of private hire vehicles in London. Well, guess what? All the ride hailers move into central London, pay one congestion charge, and are there all day looking for business. I mean, you know, the traditional private hire drivers were doing that, were exempted. It's not helped the traffic. It's, as I say, it's my Titanic moment, rearranging the deck chairs, just moving the traffic around. It just doesn't work, and there's no sense in doing it. It's something that we've got to thrash out with the current mayor.
Well, like on the Titanic, maybe we can. I'm in Vienna now. We can play some classical music while the ship goes down. We can play some music on the tube. But you know, it's funny. I'm actually looking forward to coming to London next week. Actually, Steve and I and TFL, we're going to all be on a panel, even with Steve. But it's a London Fleet Vision, safety and also environmental oriented show that we're going to have there. And I was curious to see the direct vision exemption. I don't think I've seen that before, Darius, in any other city. And we're wondering, is there any statistics that show since the program went into effect that it has had safety benefits? There's a lot of questions here in the chat about, people started to modal shift and use scooters and bikes. Steve raised the issue. Is that more safe or less safe? But is there been like any type of correlation with safety improvements?
So I think
less fatalities, anything of that nature.
Yeah, I would have to take that away, Matt. I'm not as close to the DVS scheme, Direct Vision Standard scheme, as other aspects of our delivery. I do know anecdotally there has been reductions. In fact, DVS at the moment is going through a point where we're actually tightening the standards and raising the standards. So vehicles that were previously compliant in phase one several years ago when it launched will now no longer be compliant. And we're trying to continually raise the standards because and I deal with the traffic police, the team who are responsible for responding to these incidents where unfortunately somebody has been killed or seriously injured when they come into conflict with a heavy goods vehicle. And it's not a funny, nice thing at all. It's very unpleasant. And anything that will save somebody from going under the wheels of a HGV in central London has to be a good thing. And I think, let me take away a little bit of an action. I don't want to give an action to myself, but Matt, if I can try and find some statistics on DVS and its impact, I'll happily share them with you. And if you'd like to distribute them to participants or share the link in follow up to this, I'll be happy to share that, because it's quite powerful. It speaks to the Vision Zero strategy, part of the mayor's transport strategy, where we want to try and get everyone to and from wherever they're traveling to safely.
Yeah, and we appreciate that. Especially, we're going to be talking about it next week. But I think that's unique that you, and London is getting ahead of the curve with the direct vision standard. Makes a better point of view all around, and will help improve safety. We also have a lot of members of the disability advocacy community on that are asking questions, and maybe one or both of you could, just talk a little bit about that. I mean, when I was commissioner, I used to hear all the time, but why can't we make every single cab wheelchair accessible? And the black cabs have all been accessible. And Steve, I know there are accessible vehicles also in the private hire fleet, but has the disability community been satisfied, with the policies and the programs and the services, given how all the black cabs are wheelchair accessible? Have there been any issues or complaints from the community?
Well, there is an increase in demand for more vehicles that cover mobility issues. The black cabs, as you say, are all compliant with wheelchair, but it's a one size doesn't fit all type of thing in a black cab. You've got the ramps, you've got certain way of putting the passenger. With private hire, there was more ingenuity in the type of vehicle. You could get rear loading wheelchair accessible vehicles so that, you know, anchorage points built into the chassis and what have you. But we've got a massive problem because they're not meeting the ULEZ requirements. You cannot, the number of wheelchair accessible vehicles and mobility vehicles is falling through the floor in London because the ULEZ policy is in conflict with the needs of the disabled community. So you have to take care when you regulate and think, well, one size fits all. We were told all to buy diesel by somebody that became prime minister in 2012. Get diesel, dump petrol was the political message. Then it gets turned on its head. People really need to think through the consequences, the regulatory consequences, that if you make a ULEZ ruling, what's the impact? Just like the traffic ruling on the congestion charge, what's the impact in someone else? Sadly, we mentioned the girl that, you know, that died, unfortunately. Is that due to the fact there's massive, great big swathes of bus lane and cycle highways, while the traffic is now gridlocked when it didn't used to be gridlocked before those measures were brought in? You have to look at every side of the equation. So, long answer, Matt. Sorry.
No, no worries. And we appreciate you gentlemen going over time here. I think we have time for maybe one more question. You know, we did a report, I think I mentioned this on the other webinar from last week, at the UTRC at our university, which actually we believe had an impact. We talked about, you know, the low income and equity concerns of, you know, taxi and for-hire drivers in New York City continuing to pay like they're an ATM machine, and how it's hurting them post-pandemic, but also a lot of passengers who, you know, like, you know, the question that was posed, the rhetorical question, I guess, you know, about picking up your kids on a bike in Manhattan, you know, low-income individuals coming from other parts of the city, who can't afford to drive in, but have to drive in because they have a doctor's appointment or something like that. So, I mean, we've exempted, you know, low-income individuals to a certain extent, and I think our report had some type of impact on the MTA, along with a lot of testimony that came along with it in New York. So the question is, you know, what provisions are there for, you know, low-income individuals who are disproportionately impacted? Are there exemptions, Darius, for low-income passengers who are looking to, you know, bring their vehicles in for certain uses? I know that there's some type of exemptions that might apply, but you're the expert on this.
Sorry, I muted myself because I was trying to do a bit of research in the background on DVS and find some stats for you whilst I was waiting for the next question. So yeah, in terms of low income, that's a really good question on congestion charging. We've had provisions around supporting people on low income with regards to ULEZ and the scrappage scheme, those kind of things. The congestion charge, that never really fell into the scope for discussion around an exemption or a discount. I think what we tend to find is other routes to helping people who are in that demographic. And that is by improving public transport through investing in it to make sure that services are more reliable and they can depend on them. You know, the buses in London have spaces for prams and wheelchairs. The floors on the bus is lower so they can be more accessible when people are joining from the curb. You know, it's not the same as, you know, whether it's one of Steve's members picking up a person who's got a disability or low income and traveling to the place and door to door. Obviously, it's not. I'm not going to try and make that argument, but we try and do things like that with the blue badge disability discount, which gives people 100% discount if they're a blue badge holder. Those kind of things. So I think the answer to your question, Matt, is really that there isn't a provision in the congestion charge for that, and that's the difference that you might have to where we are at the moment.
But there's an exemption for ULEZ for low income.
So low income, that was I was referring to the scrappage scheme there, where basically we supported people who were identifiable as being low income because of benefits that they received, so that they could replace a vehicle with a compliant vehicle and have a grant to give them money to support that move to a sustainable, a cleaner vehicle, which was compliant with the ULEZ. So there is an element there, but not
Right.
for the congestion charge.
And on the ULEV, this year you're getting rid of the exemption for EVs. Is that because of the ULEV, or is that
No. So that's slightly different. So there is a plan which is in place around Christmas this year, where the cleaner vehicle discount, which did allow vehicles to be exempted, which were 100% emissions free, would be discontinued. I think there's some research going into that at the moment as to what direction of travel that's exactly going to follow at the moment. But the proposal for the removal of it is on our website, and that's the direction of policy at the moment. I think there's probably going to be some mitigation in place around that. I think it's one of these things when we look at, and Steve mentioned, and I totally get where he's passionate about the removal of schemes, and I would love to be avoiding cliff edges where I can help it in my own personal life, and also that just from an operational perspective, the challenge is you have to set a boundary somewhere, and you have to make a decision to move things forward. And I think one of the aspects that might have led to the removal of that exemption from private hire vehicles, but the retention for taxis, was the increase in private hire vehicles that were taking advantage of that to have no charge. And there's absolutely a revenue part, but also it was volume of vehicles on the traffic on the roads. So you want to reduce that, therefore you remove that exemption. The same thing is probably around the decision around electric vehicles, which is on our website, where we would look to remove that discount because the volume of electric and emission-free vehicles or low-emission vehicles is getting to the point where actually it negates the effect of the congestion charge, or it hampers the ability to deliver it. Because if you continue having zero-emission vehicles, everyone will start driving zero emission vehicles eventually, and then everyone will complain about the congestion getting worse, not better. So you have to try and keep these things refreshed and updated. And what we try and do as best as possible is to respond to that policy demand from people who are the Mayor of London, whoever that is, whenever that is, and we try and make it work as best as we can. Is my answer to the question.
Yeah, no, it sort of does, and we don't want you to we don't want you to fall off a cliff, or we realize you're still working for TfL. We don't want to get you in trouble, Darius.
You're too kind.
I'm glad you mentioned the, and I think Steve has been very much a gentleman with TfL on the line here, since he is a former TfLer himself, I guess. A lot of people don't know this, but I suspect is that you mentioned the holidays. I mean, I didn't know this until recently, that the congestion charge doesn't apply in London from Christmas to New Year's. I think that the politics became so volatile when we hit the pause on it. The governor, I think, could never agree publicly to what I think is actually a very good idea, which is to have some type of flex congestion pricing on gridlock alert dates. I mean, the city comes to a complete stop when the president comes to town, or during Christmas time, Rockefeller Center. I mean, it just becomes a crawl in New York City. And I think, some New Yorkers might be willing to, stomach that charge, and maybe even double the price for those days when it's actually a public safety issue. Ambulances can't get through. When you have such intense gridlock, I think the governor and the MTA could not politically make a statement in the middle of this debate where people were going crazy. Oh yeah, that's a good idea. So they said, no, we're never going to do that, or we're not planning on doing that at all. I actually think it's not a bad idea, but who knows what's going to happen to our program. I think unfortunately, Darius, I mean, you weren't on the other call. Steve saw our webinar last week, but it's not looking very good. There's a lot of political variables. It's really all in President Trump's hands at this point, whether he's going to, I don't know if he's going to win these lawsuits that have been brought against him because of him pulling the authority for the pricing. But I mean, the reality is that the city and state legally can't do it on their own. They need the feds, and Congress is poised, I think, to pass a law if the president, doesn't kill it himself, to make it go away for everybody. And that's game over. There's no more lawsuits. Congress passes a law saying no congestion pricing. It's done and it's over. And it really is depending on whether some unrelated deal in New York is going to be struck. There's talk about gas pipelines and enforcement of immigration laws, and there was a big tiff today where the new transportation secretary called it the subway some nasty words, called it an S-hole, and him and the MTA go back and forth about how it's not safe, it's filthy. I mean, this is escalating to the point where it's like beyond silly. And I'm hoping that there's some deal that's cut, but it's not looking very good right now. And I think Congress actually holds all the cards, and there's a bipartisan support to stop it. So the governor and the city cannot do it logistically, legally, if the feds don't support it, because there's too many roads that have been paid for and built with federal funding, and you just can't do it. So that's where we stand. So we've gone way over. Do you have like any parting words of advice for us now that you know everything you know about what we're facing over here? Is there any wisdom or final words of advice you want to give to us? Maybe we start with you, Steve. Should we just scrap it, or should we tweak it, or what should we do in New York?
Well, I think the thing is congestion management, as I've said, rather than congestion charging. I think I've picked up a couple of times that you start with the money and then you work backwards from that. You really do need to look at what your objective is. Your objective is to reduce traffic, to calm traffic, to manage traffic, and not cripple industry in the process. I think there are lots of mitigations and things that can be learned from London. As I say, I quite like the tariffs that were shown on the thing last, which was a per trip basis for taxis and what have you. I mean, if they did that in London when the ride hailers started invading central London, it would have solved the problem. The decision was to not exempt people anymore. That's harmed a lot of people. So I think you have to look at the consequences and learn. And I think it'd be good for New York TfL, myself, to continue the dialogue. I think, we can offer some help and some advice that's based on real people and what's really happened, and drill down to the objectives. But I'm very grateful for the opportunity to speak today, Matt. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, Steve. We really appreciate the time. And Darius, any final words of advice for New York City?
I wouldn't dream of advising a New Yorker on what to do personally. That's probably not good for my longevity. Really, truthfully, I think just from my own experience, I think back in 2003, the congestion charge was started. People said businesses would shut up. It would be the end of the world. I think if there is a success to be talked about from the congestion charge, it's its longevity, that it has developed. That it's also a weakness in the sense that some of the things that we started with and the way that we operate are based upon legislation that was originally passed some time ago. We constantly need to look at what we're doing, think about what we're doing, but ultimately the approach that I take, has to be dictated to by the people who hold the political direction. I think there's a lot of fascinating discussion to be had, and I'm really grateful to have had the opportunity to be part of that conversation. I did have a listen into the MIT webinar that you shared a link to the other day, Matt, and it was really fascinating to see, the speaking of drama, about the drama that's going on in New York. And it took me back to when we started doing the congestion charge, and remembering when I joined TfL and I walked into a building and it had an airport style scanner because, any post that came in had to be screened for security because people were so upset about what we were doing.
Did they give you a bulletproof vest, Darius?
That wasn't quite as bad as that. We don't have so many guns over here, thankful to say. But that's what I when I hear about drama in New York, I reflect back on the time when we started, and little things like people sending a charge in copper coins. yes, there's a different time, but it's fascinating to be part of this conversation. And thank you, Matt, and everybody.
You're very welcome. And we appreciate you not falling off the cliff. And we hope we don't fall off a fiscal cliff at the MTA. And, you know, there is drama and everything in New York City. There's no question about that. I remember I actually had to wear a bulletproof vest when we reformed the taxi regulations in 1998 when we had the strike. I'll never forget that. I wasn't scared, but like they handed them out. And I was like, okay, I never wore one before. Some taxi driver tried to light himself on fire at our public hearing. So there's drama everywhere. But you know what? You know, a little traffic ain't that bad. I mean, you go to a city, if there's no traffic, there's no life, there's no business. It's boring. I mean, you know, we need a little bit of traffic, not that much, but I mean, we want a city that's vibrant, right? You don't want people, you know, like empty streets. Like it was a little creepy, honestly. It was like a Mad Max movie during the pandemic in Times Square. I mean, you know, that's not how a city should be. You know, it needs to be somewhere in the middle. And we have a lot of work to do, but, you know, thankfully we have some experiments, you know, longstanding policies to draw from in Europe and in London. So, you know, we'll continue, you know, probing, you know, experiences. We all need to learn from each other. Every city is different, but there are a lot of commonalities, right? Especially between London and New York. So we want to thank you, gentlemen, for your time. We had a record-breaking number of people on the call today, so we want to thank you all for listening. And I believe I'll turn it back over to Jerry and Camille. We have some questions about whether this is going to be recorded and available, and I think the answer is yes, right, Jerry?
Yep.
We're going to have it up on the website soon, or where do people go?
Yeah, absolutely. So the webinar is being recorded and it will be uploaded to our YouTube channel. We will be sharing the link via newsletter and social media. So please keep an eye on for it. Thank you, Matt, again for your wonderful moderation. And it's such a treat for us to have this bonus time of listening really firsthand experience and expertise from true experts in this topic from London as well. And Dr. Kamga, if you have some concluding words as well.
And thank you. I was very fascinated. And thank you, Steve. Thank you, Darius. Thank you, Matt, for allowing another 30 minutes. So that was very great. And we're looking forward for, so like Jerry mentioned, it's going to be available on our YouTube channel. So the link, and it's already recorded. And thank you very much. And have a good day.
Cheers, everybody,
Thank you.
as they say.
Cheers, take care. All the best.
Have a good one. See you soon. I'm on my way.